Good morning, and thanks for being here. I appreciate you guys so much, and I'm going to try to maybe explain why in a minute. But first we're going to set the stage. Gosh, and I was going to write this on the board first. I have problems with sequencing, like knowing which step to do first. So then I start and go, no, it should. All right, so I just want to write this down while I'm thinking about it. It's a video talk that rocked my world this morning as I was like completely trying to organize my thoughts for this morning and hijacked me completely, but in a way kind of brought everything together for me. So I'm going to maybe explain that a little bit as it being an illustration of several things. But anyway, on YouTube is a woman named, that you might recognize, Elizabeth Cronies McLaughlin. L-I-N. And her talk is called Warrior. That's why it got my attention. Warrior Women at Work. I think she just did it this week or in the last 2 weeks.
I think she just put it on last night that I saw.
Yeah, it was post, she did it sometime post Me Too movement. So I decided I would sample it this morning because, just because of the warrior thing. I knew we were talking about warrior today. And then it just blew my mind. So then I was completely discombobulated. Not that I was very organized to begin with, but I just want to get that up there in case you're interested in it. She's speaking to Google. You know, if you know Google, they have these talks where they bring people in, and at lunchtime they get some of the best minds in the world at Google to listen to. And Elizabeth Cronies McLaughlin is a lawyer, an activist, and an educator. She and a consultant for corporations around leadership. Yeah, she's a lawyer. Yeah, I think that was her first deal. And she is talking about, she's talking about transforming workplaces and and reforming to have a different style of leadership that's more holistic and more healthy and is really the leadership style of the future, I guess. And particularly, she's speaking to women in corporate America, or at least in Google, which is kind of its own little thing. They're not a typical corporation, but so the reason I bring that up is because it's a good video, but it also kind of illustrated a whole thing that I want to try to track for you, hoping that it will help you. So it's really personal. So hopefully it's not just me talking about my own story, but that it will be somewhat helpful to you guys as well. So we've been kind of talking through the four quadrants: sovereign, warrior, lover, magician, being, doing, thinking, and feeling. And most of School of Life has been about thinking. It's been about how we think, how we drive ourselves crazy with thinking, how we can reorder our thinking, how we can rewire our brains, how we can believe, blah, blah, blah. Then we talked about lover for like 3 times, I think. The realm of emotions and connections and what that's like, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to stop saying blah, blah, blah. And then I thought, well, logically, let's do warrior. And so last month we started talking about more of an in-depth deep dive into warrior, but I never really felt comfortable with it. And I think I did the first 5 or 10 minutes apologizing last time about how I suck at warrior, And then we did a little test, kind of assessing your style of assertiveness, and that was really sad to find out that, mostly my style is passivity, and I thought, well, we're just going to go into this warrior thing because it seems logical. So on the one hand, that's really a bad idea, and I should know this. Whenever I'm doing what I do, which is communicate in front of people, I need to be in my secure space. I need to be in resonance with myself. So my head, heart, gut, and feet need to kind of be on the same wavelength, and if they are, then I can relax and just let whatever comes out of my mouth be the thing that's been cooking all along. I just didn't know it. That's kind of how I communicate. And it's very annoying in some ways, but it's really kind of magical and fun. On the other hand, I've tried to be different. It just stresses me out. So I just have learned to trust that process in myself and then create spaces for myself to do that that's acceptable and helpful to other people. That's why I said I appreciate you guys so much, because it creates a container of safety for me to be who I am and to do what I do in a way where I get to win, and hopefully you guys get to win too. So in order for me to do that, I have to get into a certain sort of soul space. And so doing something because it's logical, because it makes sense, is not the soul space that I'm in. So I thought, well, I already committed myself, we got the JPEG out there, and I don't really know what else to say, so I guess we'll talk about warrior. And last time when we were here, I said, well, I think one of the components of one of the tools that we can use to facilitate our warrior being effective in the world is to understand some things about language. And so then I thought, well, I could just pull out my coach's training about language, because the whole program was about language and the philosophy of language. And I've taught this before, and I've learned this before, and these notes are 10, 11 years old. So I'll just pull that out. We'll talk about speech acts, and we'll talk about all that, and that'll be a no-brainer. We'll just do that. Well, that's what I was going to do. And then I listened to her. And all kinds of things just kind of fell into place for me. Because she was talking about warrior, and I realized that the reason why I really wasn't comfortable with warrior is because, can anybody guess? Anybody guess why I wouldn't be comfortable with warrior? Other than I'm a pathetic, passive wuss. We can save that one for my inner critic. It's okay if you don't know, but I just thought maybe somebody would guess. Because I'm a 9, that's one thing, yes.
It's aggressive to be a warrior?
Yes, it's aggressive to be a warrior because all of the warrior models are men. The warrior archetype is a man, is a male. It's ancient. It's a deeply ancient archetype. I think that human beings were warriors before they were almost anything else, other than hunter-gatherers, whatever. But the need to aggressively and actively move into your world and get what you need in order to survive, and the way human beings were in the early days was pretty much division of labor. As far as I know, I really don't know, honestly. And who knows, prehistory. But the whole way we think about warrior is a very deeply embedded set of qualities and images that we try to extrapolate from. So what we're trying to learn here is to connect with the energies inside of us that reflect thinking, doing, being, and feeling. And when it comes to doing, we're so far removed, first of all, from a warrior culture, unless you've been in the military, right? Or unless you've done some kind of sport or something that's very very warrior-like. So we have to work really hard to engage that same kind of energy. And thank God for masculine models of doing and for warrioring. But I realized as I was listening to her talk that that was why I wasn't connecting on the levels that I needed to connect on in order to be in my zone to talk about this. Because I don't have any good. Does anybody have any good feminine, any good female archetypes for warrior that aren't typical? I mean, we've got some. Yeah.
We've been listening to the Mulan soundtrack in the car for the past week.
Mulan.
So, I mean, she did have to dress up as a man, but she was.
Oh, I have yet to see that movie, Mulan. And then there's another Disney movie, right, about the Polynesian girl. That's not Mulan? Oh, Moana.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Mulan, Moana. Then there was the Scottish one. What was that one?
Yeah.
Brave. Yeah, yeah. So I think we're getting there, but it still, to me, doesn't translate. You know, I'm a child of the 60s and the early 70s.
You had Ellie Mae.
We had Ellie Mae Clampett. And we had Wonder Woman. And we still have Wonder Woman. But in order to sell Wonder Woman, what do we have to do? We had to take her clothes off, for God's sake. And then we had... Yeah. And then we have the Amazons, which were great, but they were also half naked. And who knows what they really... Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Yes?
When you were talking, I was thinking of this head nurse that I worked with at a hospital, and she was a warrior. And she ran that hospital, but then I thought, but really the doctors had the last say.
Of course, yeah.
You know, she was probably the...
She was a sergeant or a middle manager or whatever.
And she fought for everyone, and, well, you didn't want to... Anyway, but the bottom line was a doctor had power over her. You
Yeah.
know, I would say she was a big warrior.
Yeah. Hope.
Even the examples that were given, though, I mean, the word warrior has the word war in it.
Yeah.
It's carrier of war, and so even the examples that we're giving of women warriors are women who were able to adopt male energy enough to succeed, take over, power over, but they really weren't women leaders in a matriarchal sense, in a peace-based sense. It still required attack.
Yeah.
On some level. One person, and this gives my age away for sure, that I think of as a female warrior is Gloria Steinem. And I'm thinking of Gloria Steinem and that whole feminist movement that I was a part of in the 70s. Then we were able to, I think, introduce a different level of thinking about a woman's place, but we're able to do it without taking the artillery out.
Yeah. Without using the artillery. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
Harriet Tubman.
Yes, I
That
was
is
just thinking
so-
of her.
That is so non-military, you know.
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks. Yeah.
Yeah, good one.
Can you think of any other? I'm not bringing this up as a men versus women kind of thing, but I really want to broaden this whole concept of warrior so we all can buy into it. So you're not walking around like me going, I just suck at warrior, I guess, or I got to get my warrior in gear, so I better learn how to fight or confront or whatever.
I can think of one thing for me. I'm not a warrior by any stretch of the imagination, but like when it comes to protecting my kids or protecting somebody that I see that's being hurt, that's vulnerable, like right in my space, I automatically just switch into that mode without. I don't even think about it. Like it's not something I kind of have to do. It's just that protective kind of impulse is the only thing I can think of.
Yeah.
That comes. To
Yeah.
me in that way that would.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted, that's what I want to do is highlight these other non-stereotypical warrior moves so that we can identify this. So we have language, words, and distinctions for them, whether you're a man or a woman. because part of the hyper masculinized version of this energy is damaging to all of us now in this century, and that there are men who feel their warrior is collapsed because maybe they're not built that way, or maybe they're not called that way, and because it's the way it's evolved in our culture, it's very pyramid oriented. So the stronger you get in this energy, the fewer there are at the top. So the energy goes up to the top and stays there, and it's competitive, and it's a zero-sum game basically. There are winners and then there are losers. So there's a few winners kind of at the top levels, and then all the rest of us are losers. Well, that disconnects all of our warrior energy then, if that's the only way we can see it. But if we can kind of identify it, if we can think of some distinctives of true warrior energy, whether it's masculine, feminine, or animal, then we can maybe tap into it, which is kind of exactly what happened to me this morning when I was listening to her. It just clicked like that. It just was like boom, and I can't even really tell you what it was that she said that helped me align. But it was, I think, these distinctions around, and it's even in the corporate workplace, which I do not and have never been in a corporate environment. And I'm not a woman leader, and I don't lead. I mean, I lead certain things, but I don't have a work group, and I don't fit into the organizational chart anywhere. And so she's speaking to people, and a lot of women in the audience who do and who are and who will. So anyway, as I listen to her, it's one of those things to look. I guess the reason I'm telling this story is because it's one of those things to look for. So the cautionary tale is this, and I think it was like in year 2 of School of Life, we spent pretty much the whole year talking about the soul and how the soul speaks, and the different rules that the soul follows, and the different ways that the soul leads us. And that if we're in a process of becoming more whole, we have to be calling out and listening to these other forces that are trying to get our attention. The premise is that if you're awake and aware and you're moving toward wholeness, then I can guarantee one thing, and that is that your soul is trying to talk to you. And your soul is trying to kind of renegotiate the rules of engagement with the world, with you and the world. And so it's just that the soul speaks in a different language than the one that we normally listen to, and it has different rules, and we don't even hardly know what they were. I was just making them up as I went along by trying to listen. But there are different senses, there are different rules, there are different language, there's different priorities, there are different sacrifices, and it runs in parallel to the conventional way that we live our lives. And so if you're in a process of transformation, it's good to call those out, or at least try to identify them, so that you can then look back in your life and go, oh, was that my soul trying to get my attention? Or, oh, I think I heard something before I was going to marry that person, and I didn't pay attention, and now here I am, 20 years later with regret and pain and thinking that I'm a schmuck and wasted decades of my life, or that kind of thing. So if we can know what those movements are and identify them and value them and try to collect them into one place so that they can nourish each other and kind of grow and be a better voice inside of us, then we'll be better off, believe me, because life is short, and you don't want to waste decades living your life by a certain set of rules that quit working for you 20 years ago. And your soul is trying to tell you that and trying to engage you into that, and you didn't know that was a thing. So we try to make it a thing. So one of my things is that in this arena of warrior, my warrior doesn't have my warrior doesn't really have words. And when I look back at ways where I have made significant changes in my life, they've been, I don't even know how to categorize this, but they've been sort of gut impulses, or I tricked myself into something. So I used to say, when I would try to make up my resume, I used to say that I got into counseling through the back door. Like, I back-assed my way into every major decision I've ever done, because I got lured into it somehow, and then I found myself somewhere that required something of me that I didn't think I had. And so I had to do it that way because I have such a block around knowing myself and knowing what it is that I do well. So in order to know that and then put it on a resume or go somewhere and say, here's what I do and here's what I'm good at, that's just not how my warrior works. It doesn't. I kind of wish it did, but it doesn't. So my soul sets me up for these little gigs. And then there I am going, oh shit, what am I going to do now? And so then I'm in that position, and then stuff comes up that I didn't know that I had, and it comes out. And then I learn something about myself, in the process. So I just can't tell you how many, I just can't remember all the examples, or I'd give you lots of stories. But in School of Life, so School of Life is one of those things. It's not that I was listening by the time I set that up. I was listening, and the voice came very clearly and it's very gracious. Do this, do it here, do it this often, charge this much. Here, it just was like, boom. Thank you, universe, thank you, soul, set it up. Then as we started moving on, one of the pivotal moments was, if you were here, you will remember this, when I started talking about the soul, the movements of the soul, and Sage asked, well, what about soul and power? And so having someone in the audience to ask a question in the moment, on the spot, I don't know, but let's just start blabbing and see what happens. So it's those kinds of things, like evidently my warrior knows that it has to get me into a situation where I think I'm safe, and I think there's enough there so I can take the bait, and then I'm there, and then something will throw me a curve. And then, but I'm already there, and so then that comes up. So I don't know what I'm trying to say, except that sometimes your warrior moves in mysterious ways and will set you up for things that are unconventional. So when we're talking about warrior, I want you to kind of open up the field and go, oh, it's not just about taking a stand or setting boundaries or blah, 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 blah. It could be about a lot of things, and we have to be paying attention, especially if you were on the more passive side of the little assessment around assertiveness. So then part of my point is that when we're working with these energies, thinking, being, doing, whatever, what we're looking for is some sense of equilibrium, some sense of balance. But balance is a weird word, because we kind of think of balance as compromise, like not too much of this, not too much of that, but just kind of like somewhere in the middle. And I guess a better word would be integrated. We want the energies our goal is to integrate them, to bring them together so that when they do, the result is a gestalt, which means that it's greater, what results is greater than the sum of the parts. And so, Shannon?
Well, I was just starting to, as you were talking about too, connecting with something, a model that I'd heard about how, you know, a molecule is made up of elements that have properties, but when they come together to create a molecule, that molecule has properties that didn't exist within the context of those elements.
I
And
did
it
not know that.
Sounds like the same sort of thing.
Yes.
As a result of the integration of these energies, there's something that is created that did not exist, and that together they create something.
They create magic. They do something that was unexpected, and we have, and we don't know what that is. Like, we can't put our finger on it, right? I mean, I don't know anything about molecules, but it's like we have this conventional way of thinking that we just put the ingredients together, and you know, we could tear them apart. But something happens when integration happens that then creates something in the moment that was bigger than any one of those elements, and would not have been there without any of those elements, but cannot now be you can't be deconstructed. So it's like baking a cake. You put the eggs and blah, 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 and you stir it up, and then you're like, okay, you can't deconstruct the batter anymore. It's something new, and then you bake the cake, and it's a cake. It's not eggs and flour and, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So as I was sitting here thinking about how you're like broadening this idea of what a warrior is, I think sometimes we need different words.
Yeah.
You know, because warrior does have that kind of context of like probably a man, a fighter, and aggressive or whatever that is. But I think, like, when I think about you, I actually feel like you are a warrior. At least you have been in my life.
I talk like a warrior.
Like for real, you.
Thank you,
For real
Marty.
You have been, but I would maybe use the word like advocate, or you fight for me, kind of like she talked about the mama bear thing.
Yeah.
I feel like I'll be in a conversation with you, and you're fighting for me being who I need to be, or whatever that is, and that's just a different aspect of being a warrior.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It is. And as you were talking, I was thinking one of the qualities of warriorhood, regardless of what you're doing, is fierceness. Mm-hmm. There's a certain kind of edge, certain kind of fierceness that you have to, that you acquire, or you step into. You don't put it on. It's there already. And so that's why when you said it, I was like, but it's not. When my warrior moves, it's not because I'm like, I'm going to warrior the crap out of this, you know, or it's usually something that I just kind of step into and then step out of. And for the most part, it has to do with language. So I want to get to that in a minute, but I want to continue this conversation.
There's just one quote that popped into my head that I kind of wanted to share. I was just reading a book of poetry by a Black feminist author, and she said that knowing your power creates humility, and not knowing your power creates insecurity. And
Yeah, we're done. Drop the mic. I'm going to let you finish in a second. Do you know who this person is?
it was Nayira Wahid. So it's N-A-Y, I-R-A-H, I think, and then Wahid is W-A-H-E-E-D.
Okay, Nayira Wahid. I'm going to repeat this particularly for the recording because you have a very soft voice. Knowing your power creates humility, and not knowing your power creates insecurity.
And I think our culture does associate power with a male, predominantly with males, but I don't think that the males in our culture know their power. And because I see a lack of humility and a lot of insecurity, and I think that power is not a gender-specific thing.
Yes.
Yet, I don't know how to know my own power, and that's my biggest question.
Yeah.
Is finding that.
Yeah, you said so many important things. So, in our culture right now, we have a very immature view of power because it's about might. And so if you have it, then you have power. If you have might, then you have power. And whoever has more might or more, and whoever has more of that, whatever that is, whether it's many things, but if you have that, then you have more power. If you don't have that, then you have less power. And so we think of power in terms of, there are a lot of things that mean power. There can be, beauty can be power, and money is power, and fame is power, expertise is power, knowledge is power, rank is power. Am I missing anything? Those are important. That's how we look at power. It's the accumulation, and it's an accumulation of whatever that is, and it's measured, more power or less power. So not only is it made up of a lot of things that we acquire, but then it's measured against certain standards. And so, but real power, what you're talking about, is soul power. This is personal power, internal power, is not about accumulating anything. It's more about integrating and energizing what's there already. That's real. So soul power is all about authenticity and truth, personal truth. And when I say truth, it's not a concept of truth, but it's an alignment. It's like an echo of what's real in your universe. What's like authenticity is a word that comes close to that. True self is a word that comes close to that. I have this belief that each human being is uniquely constructed with a set of potentialities and qualities that are meant to be integrated at an optimal level and then offered to the world. Does that make sense? So in a pure universe, we're created, I'll use the word created because that's what I believe, we're made, and we're given these raw materials that are meant to, in a ideal, circumstances, merge together, become integrated, and become more than the sum of those parts, and shine in a way that is magnificent and kind of breathtaking. So that if you think about the people in your life or the people that you have come across that have a certain extra quality to them, a certain extra something to them, they're people that are a little more integrated and present with that integration in a way that's unique. And when that happens, it's like a burst. It's like a shining radiance of magnificence, even if it's not famous or rich or powerful or high up or privileged. You can see it in humanity anywhere you go. And so, talking about power, right? And so, and this is kind of the core of my life and the core of the work that I do. When a person can get in alignment with themselves in that way, there is an extra quality that happens. I think I've told you this story before, but I had a peak experience in my coaching program. And it was, I tell the story so many times, so I'm just apologizing ahead of time, but one of these things that you do in these weird groups, these little exercises that you do, somebody just got up and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to demonstrate how we're all connected to each other. So we're going to put on some music, and I want you to walk around the room, and I want you to look someone else in the eye and say to them, I am you, and you are me. And you can do it with people, you can do it with a pen, you can do it with a wall. And I'm like, oh, please. So awkward, walking around the room, looking at people, I am you, you're me, blah, 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 kumbaya, whatever. And halfway through the exercise, I started hearing this sound in the room. And I was thinking it was just the sound system feedback. It wasn't annoying, but it was definitely, like you can hear a hum here. It wasn't like that. It was a harmonic. If you've ever, like Ted has been a guitar player his whole life, and there's certain frequencies in the strings that if at certain frequencies they resonate a different way, and you can tell me the physics of why that happens, I suppose, but if it's on, tell me about harmonics, would you, if you can?
Yeah, basically, if you play certain notes that are in a chord, another note will appear that you didn't play.
And it's kind of an
Because of the
echo.
resonance
Yeah.
of the other notes.
And it's kind of
They
an echo,
create
but it's
another
at a higher frequency,
Usually it's a higher frequency.
because each of those strings is tuned perfectly, and when played together, there's a greater spectrum of sound that reverberates in the room. That's
It's how the sound waves are interacting.
yeah, it has to do with sound waves and how they crash into each other and then create. It's
Other waves.
the physics of sound, which I don't really understand. But if you hear them, then you know it has really a kind of a special sound. So that sound was in the room, and I was hearing it with my ears. This sound, it was a hum. It wasn't quite that high, but it was more like a humming sound. It felt very organic, not mechanical or electronic. And so I just was like, what is that? What is that? And does anybody else hear it? No one else was hearing it. And so I went to my hotel room, and I was still hearing in my ear this sound. And I heard it all through the night. And when I was lying in my bed, it was reverberating through my whole body. And I'm, what the hell is this? What is this? And I have a lot of those experiences, and I've learned that they don't necessarily mean something spectacular exactly for me, or I used to think those things were from God and were prophetic, and that entailed some kind of calling. And maybe it does, but what I learned from that was the idea of resonance. That's what we're talking about, resonance. And so when something resonates, it has that sort of amplified quality of sound that happens when things are in alignment. And so I started to think about this around the human soul and how we are this collection of qualities, experiences, thoughts, feelings, body parts, whatever. And our invitation is to bring these elements into some sort of tune, into some sort of, as much as we can. So, and when that happens, when resonance happens and you get overtones, it's like magic. It's like, boom, this is the missing ingredient. This is, now I know. And so it has a certain feel to it, personally, when you're in resonance. So that's why I like the 4 quadrants, because it's about these energies that we all have that are there, and they're meant to be integrated. And when they are, when we're like tuned up and we're functioning at our best capacity, and when that happens, then it's really sort of magical. It's really spectacular. It's like exquisite when you see somebody who's just doing their thing out there, but they're in resonance with themselves. So that's why I was a little bit nervous when I was thinking, well, I guess we'll just talk about speech acts and what is that anyway? And should I make a handout? And, oh, how am I going to remember all of this? And, okay, and then I think about how I feel when I'm in a talk like that, and I'm like snoozing because nobody likes that. But anyway, that's how we do education sometimes in our culture. We just spout information to information gatherers. And I don't like doing that. I don't like sitting in rooms where that's happening. So, but what else am I going to do? So here's back to the circle. So my soul let me do the logical thing and say, we're going to talk about warrior. And then I locked myself in, right? So then I got nervous. So the first time I just apologized, and we did our thing last week, which was fine. Not last week, but last month, which was good. But then this week, I just was like, I read through my stuff. I looked at my notes. I'm like, oh, this is really good, but oh yeah, blah blah blah, and waiting for the magic to happen, and it wasn't happening. It just and this has happened to me so many times. It wasn't happening, and so then something just runs across my view screen, and I go in there, and boom! I can't even hardly tell you what it was that just went. Now I'm back in my zone. So now I can tell I feel resonant, because I can talk about things I feel passionate about, things that I sort of know about, and things that I don't know about, but it's okay because we're together, and you're you, and I'm me. So that's a little bit of an example or an illustration where we're at. And when we're talking about warrior, a lot of us are in deep weeds because we're unclear. And I think that, so I'm going to start to turn the corner here. So part of it is because as a culture, we don't understand this very well. And we have some really unhealthy, toxic examples and ways of doing things that are convention now. Like that's what we think. And so to try to identify what does warrior look like inside me, and how do we find that? How do we listen for that? Whether we're man or woman, because we need all that energy operating in all of us to be healthy warriors. I'm going to pause here for a question or thought, or
It's not a question, but it's something that came forward as Claire shared a quote as you were talking about soul power and about authenticity and personal truth, and then we have the might power, and it almost feels like in my head the differentiating thing is soul power is when there is something that you bring and offer to the world, whereas the might power feels very individual and self-focused.
Yeah.
And that seems differentiating to me, and it also then ties back to that whole bit about when you really know your power, like your true, authentic soul power, then there's humility that emerges, and when it's the other form, it comes from a place of insecurity.
yeah, and it creates insecurity to people that are. Yep, there's something to lose, and it's probably going to be me. I'm probably going to lose. So, yeah, this kind of power, it's important to talk about it personally because we want to be effective in the world and we want to be integrated. But I think one of the things that Elizabeth is talking here, and you can, if you tune in to the zeitgeist, in the world these days, there is some major shift happening, and thank goodness that it is, around issues of power and society and groups of people and who we are. And this revolution needs to happen, or we are going to destroy ourselves and the planet as well. It's never been clearer than it is these days that we cannot sustain the path of acquisition, conquering, muscling, protectionism, all of the things that are out there now in the world. They're just illustrations of this unhealthy warrior. we're the ones that are important. There's not enough out there. We need to circle the wagons and us four no more. We got to protect ourselves from all the bad out there. We have to be the most powerful nation in the world. We have to negotiate from strength. We have to, all those things. And I'm not smart enough to know how you do those things on a world scale, but it's clear to me, and I think maybe the purpose of what's happening not just in our country but other countries in the world is to illustrate to the human race that this is disaster and this cannot keep going. If it keeps going this way, then we will destroy ourselves, and that will be the story of the human race, right? That we couldn't learn something new. We couldn't make this shift. We couldn't. So it's really important that we learn a healthy warrior, not just for ourselves, but for the whole entire world. Not to be too global about it. So the
avoiding hyperbole.
Avoiding hyperbole. It is less than 2 minutes on the doomsday clock, though. I just want to point that out. Yeah, less than 2. Yeah. So, what else?
I have a woman warrior.
Yeah.
I just watched that documentary called Unrest about the chronic fatigue syndrome, and it was made by a woman with severe chronic fatigue syndrome, and she made it on her iPhone. And then she raised some money on one of the crowdfunding.
Kickstarter or something?
She raised the 4th largest amount of money for a documentary on that crowdfunding. But it's all about, if people don't see us, we're all in bed in our houses, and people don't know how bad this is. We're dead. And this woman who made the thing, her name's Jennifer, and she says, you know what I'm really proud of? I haven't killed myself. I stick around every day for this, and she said, and I'm really proud of that. And then she gave a voice to all these, and it's like 80% of the sufferers are women. So it's one of those underfunded, under-respected illnesses.
What's the name of the?
The name of the documentary is called Unrest.
Unrest.
And it's remarkable. It's heartbreaking and remarkable.
The reason that's a great illustration of a woman with zero power using her warrior to empower other people. That's kind of it in a nutshell, right there. The difference between soul power and conventional power is connecting. Oh, it's going to make me cry. Gosh, this feels really powerful. Connecting with what you have, what you already have in your weakness. Like people with chronic fatigue look like they're dead, look like they have no power, look like they cannot cope with life, look like they're outside of society and they're just not functioning. But even they can, and not just chronic fatigue sufferers, but vulnerable people across the globe have a warrior inside, one way or the other. If we can wake that up and empower that in the context of what the world would say is weakness, vulnerability, then we're unleashing an energy. Like just her documentary ignited, validated, and empowered a whole population of people who are watching the video. That's the power of the warrior at work. And this is what we want to look for when we're thinking about authentic warrior, is this kind of resonance, this kind of magical, powerful juice in an unconventional context. That's what we want to. Thank you for sharing that, because it kind of helps put words on what is it that we're really looking for. So that is not masculine or feminine. That is warrior. that is integrated warrior, right? That's energy for action. All warrior energy is energy for action. And we have to, I mean, to know it's there, to access it, and then to release it in a way that brings a result. And hopefully the result is something that's consistent with our values. That's authentic warrior energy. And so every time we have an example of someone like that who, in the midst of their context, whatever it is, energizes what they already have and then offers it to the world, it has a powerful effect.
I don't mean to add to that list, but there is one coming to the Boulder Film Festival, and it's the weekend of the 23rd through the 25th, and it's called Sharoof, and it is about a refugee woman, I believe in Lebanon, who
Is-
had nothing, and literally turns to decide, how do I get out of this? And what she does is fights the whole system to get a food truck, and involves all the other women to make this. And I just saw the trailer, so I don't know, but it sounded exactly like somebody facing something horrendous to come out of and do. So that's a film that's at the film festival.
Great.
over the weekend.
Thank you. Sharoof. Hope.
Something that's occurring to me, and I don't know if I can say what's in my head, I'll try, is that these things all require, at some point, enough space or spiritual awakening or whatever you want to call it, to begin to believe that what I have in my brokenness can be of use or could be of power. And as it is.
Mhm.
And so I think there's something that's just sort of tapping in right now that's quite beautiful in my thoughts about just that, just that there needs to be some little personality shift
Mm-hmm.
that allows me to know that as I am, as we are, that we have a piece. We're the egg, we're the flour, we're the sugar, whatever it is, more or less, that we are a requirement towards the activation of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we hold back that power because of the thought process of brokenness or not enough or, first get your PhD or whatever, the cake isn't going to work.
Yeah. So you're talking about a necessary personality shift. Did you call it that? Personality?
Just
Some kind of shift, some kind of opening. Yeah. To make a fundamental shift in how we see ourselves or how we see how things work. And I'm going to call that shift faith. But I'm going to qualify what I mean by faith, because it's not an ideological faith. It's not a belief. It can be a belief, but faith is the juice that it's some indefinable quality. I just call it juice because it's the ability to open to possibility and to bet on it, to count on it in a way that it directs your future. So when we're talking about the human being then, in this particular context that you're talking about, that's part of why I talk about the soul and that it's there. If we make distinctions about it, like the role of intuition and the role of the body and the way the heart speaks and the way the feet speak and the way, and there being some undercurrent underneath all of us that is always running in the background and always trying to get our attention and always trying to move. That's a tenet of faith, actually, come to think of it, because if you don't think that's true, then it's not going to come up. That's why, well, when we get to language, we'll talk about how language is really, really important. But part of the reason why I spend time talking about it is just to say, hey, look, there are these things that are moving, and let's consider the possibility. What if inside of you is a part of you that already knows who you are? It just can't tell you because you don't know its language. But it's there, and we could sort of learn how to listen for it. And there are some signals, like we don't know, it's not a step 1, 2, 3, because that's a conventional way of thinking of things. But it does speak, and it has been faithful. It's been faithful to you your whole life long. We just didn't know how to listen, and we didn't think it was a thing. So when it comes across our view screen, we just dismiss it because it doesn't fit with how we see how things work. So that's why I like to be collectors of these little artifacts, soul artifacts throughout your history. What did that mean? So if you had a dream when you were a child about one thing or another, or always wanted to be this, or those are classic soul artifacts. It may not be in a nice little package the way you wanted it to be, like, I always wanted to be an astronaut. Now look, I guess I better go be an astronaut. That's too simplistic of a thing. But like for myself, I always found there's a spot in the yard that I would go out in the summers because it was too hot in the house. And I would be out in the yard. We had this weird little hedge on a hill and an elm tree, and I would go lie down in the shade of the elm tree and look at the sky through the leaves, or I'd turn over and I would I'd look for four-leaf clovers, and there's a lot of clover in our yard, and I would pull up grass, What is that? I don't know. It's a love for nature. It's a groundedness in the earth. I was just a kid going outside to play, but there's something very grounding to, and I'm not alone in that. I mean, duh, it's kind of basic human. We are connected to the earth, and the more we reconnect with the earth, the better we'll be. But for me to know that I have to be in nature, or I have to be on the ground, merging with the earth, that's essential to my nature. I think about you hugging trees, Mary. If I miss that, then I make myself sick, or I could be in some sort of malaise that I don't even know what's wrong, and then I interpret that sickness badly, and it doesn't lead me to the solution. So that's just a small example, but that's one of those soul artifacts that if we kind of put that lens on our life and started listening for it and asking your soul to show them to you, you probably could collect them. And you collect them in a little basket, and the more you collect them, the more sense it makes, and then you're like, oh, I'm this kind of person. I always thought I was that kind of person, but really I'm this kind of person. I spent tons of time trying to be this kind of person. I'm just not. So I'm going to quit being that kind of person. I'm going to do this instead, like me backing my way into things. That's just a characteristic of me, because who cares why? It just is. So one thing that we need to do, so it's faith. So if I don't believe that that's a possibility, if I don't believe or get some hopefulness or some sense of possibility that may be true, then I'm going to shut those voices down, shut those signals down, and I'm going to make myself sick. But it costs a lot to begin to rearrange your life around these things. And in my work, this is where people will balk, because they get it. They start to get it. If I start looking at my life this way, what if I never find a job? What if I never find a partner? What if I look stupid? What if this was all a big joke? What if I invest all my time and energy into listening for who I am, and I spend 5 years in the wilderness? You might spend 5 years in the wilderness. That's part of the cost. And I watch that happen all the time. And I'm like, oh God, I hope this is true, because this person just quit their job. And help them believe, and then they believed, and now they're out there, and they're like, what the hell am I going to do now? You know, I have to sell my house. I have to sell my car. You know, these are real life things, and they're based on what real faith is, which is the ability to open to possibilities and to make a bet on it, make an investment in it emotionally, and all other kinds of materially, and all of these things. So in order to believe, then sometimes we have to, so back to the 4 quadrants model, if you're like most of us, your magician part of you, the thinking part of you, acts as a risk manager. And the risk manager is in charge. So the risk manager is the one who looks at all the opportunities or choices that you might make, or scans the whole of your life, trying to reduce risk and optimize success. And that's good. The problem is that the risk manager was trained early on, very conventionally. And so it's going to have as its limiting mindset certain rules about how the world works and who you should and shouldn't be. And alongside with the risk manager, we have the inner critic. The inner critic is also part of the risk management team, let's just say. So we learn these ways of operating in the world, and then we try to fix ourselves. You know how this works. I talk about hardly anything else, but we look at the world through risk manager critical eyes. We turn those eyes on ourselves. We try to self-improve according to those principles. And so a lot of us get sick that way, but all it was ever trying to do is help you. And so when we're doing a process of transformation where we're trying to shift out of old conventional ways of being in the world that weren't very satisfying to us to a more authentic, more integrated way of being who we are, that creates a bit of a crisis inside. And so we have to manage that crisis. And the risk manager is the gatekeeper of risk. And so we have to negotiate with the risk manager in some way. Part of the reason why I do what I do is that I'm negotiating with all your risk managers. Every month, I am trying to convince your magician to give it a shot. And the only reason I do that is because I have to do that to myself all the time. So when you're talking about this kind of a shift in being in the world, of course your risk manager is going to say, we tried that when you were 3, remember? We tried that. And look how it worked out for you. Like you got bullied, or you looked stupid, or you got abused, or you got abandoned. So we're not doing that again. We're not playing by those rules. We're going to play by these rules, and we are going to fix you so you can win at this game. So the shift, we have to negotiate with this part of us, this risk manager, and that's in the magician quadrant. So did you have something to say, or are you just cheering me? Okay, go ahead.
As you're talking, I just keep thinking that's where we have to go back to the sovereign part, which we haven't really got to yet.
No.
But that's the part that instigates those changes.
Yeah.
And I think we go to the therapist when we here are our own sovereign
Yeah.
as much as we need to.
Yep.
And we need to get back to that so that we can do this.
Yes, very true. Yeah. So yeah, the soul stuff is really coming through the sovereign quadrant.
And perhaps the magician, if the magician is going to shift from a conventional risk manager way of thinking to maybe a more integrated, healthy magician way of thinking, is not to ask and look at all the things that could go wrong if you don't do this, that your soul is bringing forward, but what is the risk of you not doing that?
Yeah.
What's the downside
Yeah.
if you don't take that risk to do that? Let's surface some of those things so that we now have some energy to feel empowered to move forward, or
Yeah.
we tried that when we were 3 and it didn't work. What's different now
Yeah,
than when we
exactly.
were 3?
Yes, exactly.
Those are the things that started to come forward for me as you were talking about the way that magician might need to shift.
Yes.
In that risk management.
Yeah, I hope people on the recording heard that because that was too good for me to repeat. But one thing remember, the risk manager is I like to call it the gatekeeper. And for most of us, if we don't get past if we can't convince the risk manager that there's, some hope for success, then we're not going to buy it. So we have to convince it, so to speak, and the best way to do it is with a better magician. So that's why we're here. So in answer to your question, Hope, about what is that extra juice, so it's faith, but we have to be able to negotiate this relationship between the hopeful soul that speaks this weird language and the risk manager who is just trying to keep us safe. And so that's why we do so much magician work in here, is mostly just to satisfy the risk manager, the gatekeeper. So it's like, all right, whatever. You got 30 days. If we're not, and sometimes one technique in therapy that we sometimes use is we just pull all of that out and act it out. So we listen to all those voices and then we negotiate with the risk manager and say, well, what's at risk if we try this? What's at risk? So then the risk manager will say, well, she might look stupid, or he might lose his job, or he might go broke, or blah, blah, blah. Well, those are really good things to be afraid of, aren't they? Yeah, well, we would love to have you and then you just negotiate as if it was a conversation. Usually these things are really, really fun and really interesting. And so we bring everybody to the table, so to speak, and then say, what are the conditions under which you would allow yourself to try this way? Well, okay, but only if you don't spend all your savings, or might be something like that, or it might be something just, well, okay, but yeah, I get your point. So I guess I'll just back down a little bit, but I'm going to be watching. So you say, thank you for being there, thank you for watching. Please, raise a red flag and we'll check in with you from time to time in this process. And so that's the long answer to that question. There are ways that you negotiate with yourself, but you have to do it in a way that is inclusive. You can't just all the time be shouting at your critic to shut the hell up. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes it's just like, stop it right now. But long term, you can't be cutting off pieces of yourself that you installed there to help you. So the bigger picture is get everybody at the table and assume that you created all of these parts of yourself for the same purpose that you're trying to achieve now. Wholeness and happiness. It's just that certain things worked better, didn't work, or got too big for their britches, or some rearrangement needs to happen. And for the sake of all of us, could we please? And then you start negotiating with yourself. And then this little hopeful possibility, you can begin to then get those other functioning parts of you in service to that rather than in obstruction to that goal. Because you're all in it together. So we're not going to talk about speech acts today. Well, maybe I'll put them up on the board, but we'll maybe start doing that some more next time.
One of the things I keep thinking about is the platform that artists have as warriors, whether it's writing like the poet or painting or that kind of art, but musicians is what keeps coming to my mind as far as just them using their platform as warriors in a really beautiful way. That like so many men and women are coming to my mind, and as far as just, I don't know, they're fighting to help us see truth, or to fight for justice, or even just personally, I feel like artists will help me get to that alignment place when I hear a certain song.
Yeah.
Or or it gives me the courage to like step out of my comfort zone and go do something. And so I just wanted to read one as I was thinking about that. There's a song called Better Way by Ben Harper. And that song, the video, when my husband was watching it, just like broke him wide open. I actually blame Ben Harper for our adoption because that kind of changed the whole course of our like life. But I just wanted to read like a couple verses of this song because I can't get it out of my head. So, what good is a man or woman who won't take a stand? What good is a cynic with no better plan? I believe in a better way. Reality is sharp, it cuts at me like a knife. Everyone I know is in the fight of their life, and I believe in a better way. To take your face out of your hands and clear your eyes. You have a right to your dreams, and don't be denied. I believe in a better way. And so that's just an example of, I just feel like art, and like I know Dawn and different people went to like art show with all the pictures of women that I feel like that was really powerful for people. So I don't know, I just think, isn't that would be a warrior?
Oh yeah, definitely. Maybe I'll just introduce you. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about the speech acts because what, and the documentary that you mentioned, what those are offers. They're offerings. And I don't know what I can. So real quick, the reason I want to talk about speech acts and is because language is powerful, and as 21st century Americans, most of us, especially in this room, we don't fight big battles with guns and whatever. Some of us are advocates. Our battles exist on different planes, and places where we're asked to stand up and exert our power are usually in some kind of a situation where we need other tools. And so our main tool to exercise whatever quadrant we're in or whatever we're trying to do is language. And if we can understand language as tools of power, then we can tap into that and kind of use that to help facilitate our energy in the world. And so I'm going to get to this connection in a minute. So what we have for speech acts are assertions, assessments. We've talked about that concept in here quite a bit. And declarations. Then we have requests, promises, and offers. So these two illustrations, the documentary and the song, as well as art and the poetry that you brought in, all of these are examples of people making an offering. It's a speech act, one way or the other. And the power that they offer in the context in which they offer it is tangible. So a song your husband hears can pull all that stuff together and change your lives. That's a powerful speech act. And the woman making the documentary on her iPhone, right, that touches thousands, perhaps millions of lives and energizes and gives hope to and gives focus to and distinction to a whole hidden population, that's a powerful offering. That's a speech act. A poem, just one quote that when you read it, it just, set all kinds of stuff off on me. Knowing your power creates humility, and not knowing your power creates insecurity. That's a declaration, actually, that she offered to the world. So these are, the area of language is one of our most powerful tools in being and conveying ourself into the world. And so they're worth talking about. Yeah.
So one of the pictures from this Women of Paris, it was about women who'd come into Paris to go to art school but couldn't because there were no art schools for women. They didn't allow the women in that, and they created their own, but they also tried to fit in the best they could, whether they wore pants or whatever. But the one that truly I loved was from a Finnish artist who, it's this picture of this young girl out in the field with her voice just pushing out into the world, and it was just something. All these paintings were so powerful, but it is the offering. It's
Yeah.
the voice. It's something that tells you that's what power is.
Yeah. And it's tangible. You can feel the power of it. So that's why I want to tap into the power of language, because that's what I just now discovered. That's why I wanted to do SpeechX, because it really connects the dots. So sorry that it's 10 minutes to 11, and I finally figured out why we were doing this.
Well, and finding your voice is synonymous with finding your power.
Yes. One thing that Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin says on this, and it's one of the things that she teaches evidently when she consults with organizations, is that, especially for women leaders, your story is your power. And so telling your story, owning and telling your story is a powerful way to lead. It's a powerful way to be. I don't know actually how she uses it, but when she started talking about stories, when you have half the population whose stories are forgotten, then you're missing 50% of potential. And so she talked about how women's stories get erased, and somebody asked a question, can you explain that? I don't understand what that means, and how can, anyway. And she gave an example of, in her family, so this name, Cronise, that she has as her maiden name, and she said that her dad was way into genealogy and ancestry. And they traced it actually means iron crown, and they traced the beginning of that name back somewhere in Germany, where in the 3rd century there was a queen, a German queen, who reigned over a empire that was as large as the Ottoman Empire. And who was ever taught that in history? So there's a significant society that reigned for I don't know how many years, she might have said, but I forgot, over a significant amount of territory, but it's been erased from our history, or never carried forward. And so it's not just women's history, it's all kinds of histories. We are in the middle of Black History Month. Oh boy, they should feel privileged. We give them a whole month to talk about the history of Black culture and all the different Black cultures, as if there's only one. So when we can unearth and listen to and empower and own stories, that is a very powerful kind of a thing. And then I lost why I was connecting that to.
There's one more connection with a voice that I have. I was reading a book about chakras, and your throat chakra is what connects your heart to your seat of wisdom.
Oh, really?
And because your throat chakra is in between those two, and to have an open throat chakra means that you then have more of a connection to your truth, because to be able to speak your truth brings power to you, but if you don't have that connection between your heart and your seat of wisdom, then you won't be able to speak out your truth.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, can I just say one more thing? So about voice. So that's the connection I was trying to make. Voice and story, and voice and distinction. So if there's no language for what it is you need to say, then of course you have no voice. Like if there's no one to, you can shout, you can sing, you can yell. That's good voice. Just connecting up with your body, that's important to do. But the connection between story and having a voice and owning who you are and then making declarations and offers is all a part of the process. So that's why a lot of us are feel like we're drifting or floundering, because we don't know how to organize our story in any way that makes any kind of sense. We don't know how to inhabit it except through the lens of the critic. And so in order to rewrite that, if we begin to rewrite that story or set the false story aside, then we can start building another story that then helps us with the voice that we have and helps us have the confidence and strength and warrior energy to make our offer to the world.
I'm seeing an energy healer, and it kind of a connection, not the same language, like she doesn't use the word chakras, but like I can say from my growing up in a very passive Midwestern, women had no voice kind of place, like we do 2-hour sessions, she goes over my body, and like she knows that my voice has been closed, that it's been shut down. And so we've done this work, and she puts her hands on my neck and different areas, and actually came to the exact same conclusion that the heart is connected to the mind and meets the, but one thing that's been helpful to me is not even having to speak words, but she has recommended just moaning, just vocalizing. Sometimes if I'm upset but I don't really know what I want to do, if I'm in my car, I will just make utter noises. And she's like, you don't have to say words, but you are enlivening and activating your voice simply by the vibrations and those things. And another thing that was interesting was I did martial arts for 6 years, and regularly was vocalizing. I mean, you grunt and you speak as you do everything, and haven't been doing that for about 1.5 years. And so she's like, I want you to maybe not go back to that, but start doing your forms again, start doing, because I do workouts down in the basement. She's like, just practice those yells. And that just the physical act plus the vocalizing, and that was about a few weeks ago, but I can already tell like something's unleashing. So
Wow.
that's that whole realm of energy and medicine is pretty fascinating too.
Yeah.
So.
And powerful and unconventional and easy to dismiss. Hope.
I was just going to add another experience to what you both said. Thanks for bringing that up. Just the vibrational spaces in our body. As I do Reiki, and oftentimes with women that will come in with a particular health issue, what ends up happening is that the throat chakra is closed. And so I might have them also to vocalize or make sounds, because the stress has gone into the spleen or into an area of the body, but really it's something that hasn't been said or hasn't been acknowledged, not even said with words. But the other thing I wanted to say, and I hope we can talk more about speech acts, is that speech acts there's a different barometer for women's speech acts than men's speech acts in our culture. And that I think that often women's offerings are looked at as assertions, whereas men's assertions are looked at as offerings in the corporate world and the political world in particular. particular I'm thinking of, but perhaps even more so than that. I think there's different systems of, there's different definitions and different qualitative ways of receiving the speech acts from men than women. So I'm just appreciating tapping into this. Where I work in a school, a K-8 school, and we had a male principal. He's a very narcissistic dude. He's gone, thank God. But anyway, and we have a female principal now. And it's been interesting to see how the staff receives her authority versus the previous, narcissistic a-hole. Glad he's gone now. Even though they might have said the same thing.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, so now that I know why we're talking about speech acts, we'll talk about it next time. I just had some vague idea. Anything else? 2 minutes left, and then.
I was just thinking, like, as a doula, when women are going through labor, moaning, it was really interesting what you're saying, like, moaning is what we encourage them to do. Like, sometimes they're encouraged to just be quiet, work through it, but when they're holding all the pain and all the insecurity and all the fear in their bodies, the moaning will open up their bodies to do what they need to do. And I think that often, like, I also grew up in the Midwestern, you just get it done, do what you need to do, and your voice isn't encouraged. And I think just in life in general, just, those guttural moans or speaking out what needs to be spoken to unleash or release anything else that needs to come out as well.
That's great. Wonder if growling. I do a lot of growling. Ted, Ken, and Ted. The other thing I wanted to point out, that documentary is just sticking in my head, and the whole field of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, those kinds of debilitating illnesses, and your comment that it's mostly women that suffer that. So when I take that fact and I put it into culture, anything about that seem unusual to you? And people who embody certain things out in the, and I don't know if this is true, and there's no way to prove it, and I certainly don't want to reduce the diagnosis down to something like that. But just like our bodies will get sick when we're out of alignment and when we're trying to do something to ourselves that doesn't work, I think the same is true in systems. That when systems are sick, then elements of the system become symptomatic. And so if we have people in our culture who are suffering to this degree, this mysterious syndrome, or 2 or 3 or 4, there's several of them, then if there's a kind of social, psychological, spiritual sickness in the system, then there's going to be symptoms. And in large systems, those symptoms are people. And so as we listen to what's wrong and needs to be fixed, and hopefully if we can, it just makes me think the possibility is that, we, just like we heal families, we heal people, we heal systems, we heal people as well, maybe even diseases.
One thing I'm struck with, though, is that women tend to be far more loquacious than men.
Loquacious meaning?
We speak a lot.
Oh, yeah.
We say a lot more words than men do. And so possibly what's important is to think about the words that we say to ourselves and to other people more than we do.
Yeah.
Because we're teaching ourselves things as
Yeah.
we say things.
Yeah, and that's why the philosophy of language is so important. One of the reasons why is that it's important to know the power of what we're doing when we're speaking. And then you can reflect and think, what kind of words am I using? What kind of ways am I speaking that aren't serving me? And speaking to other people, but also speaking to myself that aren't. And how can I maximize the impact of the speech acts that I make as a agent of my warrior energy. Also the other types too, but we're talking about the warrior. So, okay, so we're done. Thank you for being here and for just being who you are. I really appreciate you very much.
Don't forget to only have your money there.
Oh, yeah.